So Jack Dorsey, of course, former leader, CEO, founder, whatever you want to call him, no more of Twitter though. He had some interesting tweets that he put out. Was this a day ago? Right? That he put out, and he talks about basically his experience with being a leader. Now, he has been caught lying with basically the Congress as well about some of the things that he said was happening or wasn't happening on Twitter. Turned out it was. And really right now he's going through this phase of like trying to, as a CYA, I guess you can say that that's what it was, a CYA, I don't know. But he's trying to get ahead of some stuff, or rather make explanations for why Twitter, because now that the Twitter files is happening and this is why he did it. He says it. We're going to read through this. And there are some things I think that is important for you to pick up as a person that may be an entrepreneur, aspiring one, aspiring creator, or whatever. But this is what he said. You can go see this from his Twitter, and then he puts a link for the entire thing, so you don't have to like read a thread. But this is what Jack said. We're going to read through this. He said there's a lot of conversation around the Twitter files. Here's my thoughts on how to fix issues identified. Now, his credibility in trying to fix the issue when he facilitated the issue as a leader makes it questionable. But I do think there's, again, some tidbits in here. I'll start with the principles I've come to believe based on everything I've learned and experienced through my past actions as a Twitter co-founder and lead. So this is what he says. Social media, number one, must be resilient on us to corporate and government control. I would agree with that. Big platforms, high user bases are very attractive to government. And yes, it must completely lock them out of it. Number two, only the original author may remove content they produce. So essentially saying that as far as taking content off should not be on that moderation should not be on the platform. It should be something that is solely left up to the actual creator of the tweet, which is actually a little ballsy, right? I mean, a lot of stuff would be just stay on there. I'm not necessarily against it. Moderation, number three, he says, moderation is best implemented by algorithmic choice. We'll see what he means by that. This is what he says. The Twitter, when I led it, and the Twitter of today do not meet any of these principles. Okay, so he's saying it's not that today, and it's really not, and it wasn't that when he led it. This is my fault alone, as I completely gave up pushing for them when an activist entered our stock in 2020. Okay, so he's saying that he failed, which yes, you did. And he's saying that he let activists in 2020. He says, I no longer had hope of achieving any of it as a public company with no defense mechanism, lack of dual class shares being a key one. I planned my exit at that moment, knowing I was no longer right for the company. So he's saying that, well, I let these people in and I made myself powerless. And you could take that in a couple of different ways. The first way, which may be a very obvious one, is that he's full of crap, right? It's like you let these people in. Was it silly? Was it negligent or whatever you want to call it? Irresponsible? You did it nonetheless, and you paid for it. The other part is I do see, and I've seen this with other companies, in that you do let in ticking time bombs. And this is why you should vet every single person that you bring into your company, every single one, from the janitor on up. Vet them and vet them thoroughly. And in the event that you see anything remotely questionable, I would say make sure you're in a right to work state, which is stupid. That's the term that we have to have for people being able to do it with their property, private property, what they want to do with their private property, and get them the hell out. The whole going public and the money that comes with that is so attractive to so many folks. And they, now you invite more people in. You got to have a board. You got these shareholders and all this stuff. Like the minute you start going in that route, the minute that you basically, if you found it, you no longer are the sole owner, which is what you should be if you want to be able to control it in whatever direction that it's going. He continues on, the biggest mistake I made was continuing to invest in building tools for us to manage the public conversation versus building tools for the people using Twitter to easily manage it for themselves. This has been my argument for Twitter all along. It's that you need to put moderation as much as you can into the hands of the user. Let them control what it is that they see. Let them control what it is that they like new discovery stuff. Let them be able to have as much power as they possibly can for that. Then you don't have to worry about, and you shouldn't need to worry about, but you get what it is that I'm saying. You don't have to worry about the company itself moderating the material, which is what happened with Twitter, and it's happening with other forms of social media, where it's less about you being able to use mutes and blocks and all that stuff to see what you want to see. Okay. It has become the company itself, Twitter, and obviously in combination with the activists and maybe even the governments around the world, say, okay, you can or can't see this. And that's the problem. Says this burden of the company with too much power and opened us to significant outside pressure, such as advertising budgets. I generally think companies have become far too powerful, and that became completely clear to me with our suspension, okay, got you, of Trump's account. As I've said before, we did the right thing for the public company business at the time, but the wrong thing for the internet and society. Much more about this here. And he tweeted about it, and he says, I do not celebrate or feel pride in having, I remember this tweet, having to ban Donald Trump from Twitter. And this is back when it happened. Or how we got here. After a clear warning, we take this action. We made a decision with the best information we had based on the threats of physical safety, both on and off Twitter. Was this correct? He says, I continue to believe there was no ill intent or hidden agendas by everyone, acted according to the best information we had at the time. Sure, Jam. Of course, mistakes were made, obviously, but if we had focused more on tools for the people using the service rather than tools for us and move much faster towards absolute transparency, we probably wouldn't be in this situation of needing a fresh reset, which I'm supportive of. Again, I own all of this in our actions, and all I can do is work to make it right. Well, unless Elon Musk hires you, you ain't doing shit. But he says, back to the principles. Of course, governments want to shape and control the public conversation and will use every method at their disposal to do so, including the media. This is true. And the power of a corporation wills to do the same is only growing. It's critical that the people have tools to resist this, and the tools are ultimately owned by the people. Allowing a government or a few corporations to own public conversation is a path towards centralized control. Not necessarily wrong, but it's less on like what he's trying to play in the middle, and I don't like that shit. Because what he's trying to do is make it seem like they're both in the same, and they're not. Leftists do this all the time, where it's like, well, it's still, they say tyranny by way of the corporation versus tyranny by way of the government, as if they're the same thing. And no, actually, you cannot have tyranny by way of the corporation unless there's government involvement. Okay? And if you know what the legal definition of a corporation is, it requires government anyway. Nonetheless, they aren't equal, right? Those are not equal. One has a territorial monopoly, and I would expect you to understand that because you tweeted about The Anatomy of the State by Murray Rothbard, Jack, and apparently you didn't read it. You're pulling a LeBron James on me. Just got the show in the book and you ain't actually read it. There is a significant difference between an institution such as the state has a territorial monopoly on use of force, violence, and ultimate decision-making versus a, let's say, company, right, that does not have that, okay? Now, that doesn't mean they are without influence or power and influence, which basically go hand in hand, but to act like, well, it's the same. It's not. They are completely different things, and one requires the other. You don't get power like that unless you are working with government, right? And we saw that they were doing that. I'm a strong believer that any content produced by someone for the internet should be permanent until the author chooses to delete it. It should always be available and addressable. Content takedowns and suspensions should not be possible. Boy, that is real rich coming from you right now. Doing so complicates important context, learning, and enforcement of legal activity. Yeah, because basically you cover their tracks. There are significant issues with this stance, of course, but starting with this principle will allow for far better solutions than we have today. The internet is trending towards a world where storage is free and infinite, which places all the actual value on how to discover or see content. Now, look, I do totally understand when you have actual criminal activity, like acts of aggression, and you don't want that stuff to manifest on your website, right? And to be honest, I don't think any rational person, would think that a company is irrational in the event that they say something like CP should not be on the website at all, right? It's automatic takedown, automatic right out the rip, finding who did it and making sure they pay the price. I don't think anybody's going to be against that. You know what I mean? Like actual crimes. But that's not what happened. What has been moderated to hell has been stupid stuff, such as someone having a differing opinion on like the vaccine, or the COVID jab, that is, or someone having, even if they're a doctor for that matter, or someone having different political views as far as something else, right? Like that's what happened, and you take that stuff off. And you don't allow it, and then you punish the person, of course, that posted it, and that's where it's nonsensical and BS. Straight legitimate criminal. I don't mean criminal by way of what the government deems as a crime. I'm saying there's a legitimate act of aggression, right? And like there is an actual victim here. I totally understand. And I totally get why someone would say that material does not need to be posted on our website, and we are going to address it immediately and taking it down. I don't know any rational person, even though the people that deem themselves as free speech absolutists, I don't think any of those people are going to have any problem with you taking that stuff down. But that's not what happened. What happened is you were taking down stuff that had nothing, that there was no, if anything, it was shed light on the criminal activity by way of the government. Right. So that's the point here. You know what I mean? We have, which brings me to the last principle. Hold on. The internet. I read that. I think. Did I read that? Trending. Yeah, I did. Which brings me to the last principle of moderation. I don't believe a centralized system can do content moderation globally. It can only be done through ranking and relevance algorithms. The more localized, the better. That's a straight up libertarian position, right? The more localized, certainly the better. Instead of a company or a government. Again, I hate that he keeps conflating the two. Building and controlling these solely, people should be able to build and choose from algorithms that match their criteria, or not have to use any at all. I like that. I would love for example, the trending topics, for me to not see them. A follow action should always deliver every bit of content from the corresponding account, and the algorithm should be able to comb through everything else through a relevance lens that an individual determines. There's a default G-rated algorithm. There's everything else that one can imagine. So basically saying that if someone follows someone, they should be able to see that material from that person. I don't disagree with that. But again, it's just rich coming from Jack right now. The only way I know to truly live up to these three principles is a free and open protocol for social media that is not owned by a single company or a group of companies and is resilient to corporate and government influence. He keeps conflating. He keeps like acting as if one of those, like, they're the same essentially in terms of threat. And I feel like he's doing that purposely, and that's some leftist shit. Company is resilient to corporate and government influence. The problem today is that we have companies who own both the protocol and the discovery of content, which ultimately puts one person in charge of what's available and seen. This is not by definition a single point of failure, no matter how great the person, and over time will fracture the public conversation and may lead to more control by governments and corporations around the world. Like, again, Jack is he's killing me with this whole government and business, right? As if like the corporate entities that would have enough power aren't the ones that either get the government contracts, work directly with the state, or work directly with the states in order to ensure their power. Those are two completely different things. Now, I will deviate a little bit here from what he's saying. While I'm all about decentralization, the problem is not about, let's say, who has that ability to do it. That's not the issue. The issue is in like the actual enforcement of the moderation, right? So whether it be one person of 3,000 people, it doesn't really matter. And it doesn't mean that, yeah, it's going to be a good decision just because it's a decision that's made by a collective like number of people as opposed to one person. But you can still accomplish what it is that he's saying, and it's essentially putting the moderation in the hands of the user, while also having a level of transparency in terms of how that works. And that's what hasn't happened. That's what made the Twitter files, as they continue to come out, such, I guess, a bombshell, is because, yeah, it looks like we knew that this was happening and we knew that this was taking place, but you see that it's so blatant in how internal that stuff is. So you know that this is an effort that is being made by these groups of people, and obviously they have their own activism and their own little forms of agenda that they're trying to implement. You know what I'm saying? So in order to mitigate that, you have to stand firm on that policy. And really, it doesn't matter. Hell, if anything, the more people that you have pitching in on that, the less likely that you're going to have that. And you see that with your own company, and that you let these activists in who let in other activists. And next thing you know, it's a heavy slant one way, right? In terms of how this is enforced. I believe many companies can build a phenomenal business off an open protocol. For proof, look at both web and email. The biggest problem with these models, however, is that discovery mechanisms are far too proprietary, and fixed instead of open or extendable. Companies can build many profitable services that complement rather than lock down how we access this massive collection of conversation. There's no need to own or host it themselves. So open source type stuff. Many of you won't trust this solution just because it's me stating it. I get it. But that's exactly the point. Trusting any one individual comes with compromise. It's not necessarily. If that one individual is saying, hey, these are the rules, and it's transparent, that's going to be far more preferable than a bunch of 3,000 people making the decision. And then we don't really know what's happening, which is what happened with Twitter, right? You had all these people that had infiltrated nobody knows what the actual algorithm is, or nobody knows what the actual protocol is until people get outed, that is. It has to be something akin to what Bitcoin is shown to be possible. If you want proof of this, get out of the U.S. and European bubble of Bitcoin price fluctuations and learn how real people are using it for censorship resistance in Africa and Central South America. That is very true. I do still wish for Twitter and every company to become uncomfortably transparent in all their actions, which is the main thing that people want. And I wish I forced more of that years ago. I do believe absolute transparency builds trust. As for the files, I wish they were released WikiLeaks style with many more eyes and interpretations to consider. And along with that, commitments of transparency for present and future actions. I'm hopeful all of this will happen. There's nothing to hide only a lot to learn from. The current attacks on my former colleagues could be dangerous and doesn't solve anything. If you want to blame, direct it at me and my actions or lack thereof. And I think this is probably talking about like the Yoel Roth guy who really got off on the censorship, and I think he was head of the like trust and safety department or whatever that is. As far as the free and open social media protocol, there are many competing projects. He talks about Blue Sky, AT Protocol, Mastodon, Matrix, yet another, and there will be many more. One will have a chance of becoming a standard like HTTP or SMTP. It says this isn't about decentralized Twitter. This is more focused on an urgent push for a foundational core technology to make social media a native part of the internet. I believe this is critical to both Twitter's future and the public conversation's ability to truly serve the people, which helps hold governments and corporations accountable and hopefully makes it all a lot more fun and informative again. I'm not against alternatives trying to become alternatives and doing more in a transparent way. Obviously, it's a little, again, rich coming from Jack. You kind of got to take it with a grain of salt in terms of what he's saying. Is he actually feeling any sort of guilt for his actions and what it is that he caused? I don't know. But I will say that the core principle, which is having social media, platforms that allow people to moderate the content themselves, is ultimately what this boils down to. And that is far more preferable than having just a handful of people, one person, whoever it is, sit up here and dictate what people must see, should see, what is the legitimate form of information, and then consequently, kind of building a slant with the platform that is, like, let me say this. If it's in the hands of the user, then they can make that social media platform in terms of visibility be more akin to what they want to look at, not something that is being forced upon them by way of the platform itself. And because these guys have no ability to be objective about anything, well, they will, of course, have a actual slant, which is what you see with Twitter. You see this with Facebook. You see this with all these other platforms who have taken it up with basically their own company to say it is up to us to decide what people must see. 2020 was a year where so many different companies, big companies, a lot of them working with the government in many different ways, with like the COVID stuff, showing or not allowing people to speak freely about something as simple as that, just really went and showed you what this is about. Now, of course, leftists got off on it because leftists felt like, well, let me say this. They are the ones that you can be a proud and open leftist without fear of being taken down. That's not to say there aren't a leftist or two that may got banned or from a social media site. That's not what it is that I'm saying, of course. But it's an obvious slant. We see with the Twitter files, it was a very obvious slant about how they would, put this trending thing like you can't trend and all that sort of stuff, shadow banning on different people that happen to all be not leftists. That's what I'm saying. So that's the thing you fear. And leftists play the long game and they play it smart. They knew how powerful that is for them to be in control of a massive platform that has a higher user base and dictate what is considered righteous information so that their ideas are allowed to manifest while their ideological and political opponents are suppressed. That's how they play the long game, and they understand that. It's like I don't have to have the ideas on my side. That's how they view it. They say, well, we want to suppress our enemies is what they say. So they do. And it benefits them in more ways than one. Wherever you're viewing the content, I appreciate you. If you enjoyed it, you may be interested in my comic book company, Rippaverse Comics. Our first book and campaign, ISOM #1, brought in $3.7 million with tens of thousands of satisfied customers. Visit Rippaverse.com to check out our store and stay up to date with the latest campaigns from one of the hottest new comic book companies. Also, my first big step towards a parallel economy was the development of my personal website, ericdjuly.com. This entirely replaced my Patreon. Now, if you enjoy this content, please consider becoming a member over at the website. We have an ever-expanding list of perks for various membership tiers, a forum, and a phone app. Some of these perks will even benefit you if you're fans of the Rippaverse. Anyway, I appreciate you so much for being a supporter and or customer. I even got a little love for my haters.